There is a village in the hills of England where old stones still stand in quiet fields. They have seen rain, snow, weddings, harvests, and long years of peace. But in the year 1666, those stones marked a line between two worlds. On one side was a village touched by plague. On the other side were people who were still safe. The people of Eyam knew that if they ran, they might carry death with them. So they faced a choice that is almost impossible to understand. Would they leave and try to save themselves, or would they stay and protect people they might never meet? This is the true story of Eyam, the village that chose not to run. Eyam is a small village in Derbyshire, in the Peak District of England. In the 1660s, it was a working village of stone cottages, farms, small trades, and families who knew one another well. In the morning, smoke would rise from low chimneys. Sheep moved across the hills. Children ran between narrow lanes. At night, families sat close to the fire, because the hills could be cold even when the day had been bright. It was not a rich place. It was not famous. It was simply home. But far away, London was suffering through the Great Plague. In 1665, people there were dying in large numbers. News travelled slowly, but fear travelled faster. Then, in the late summer of 1665, cloth arrived in Eyam from London. The best-known account says the cloth was damp when it arrived. A tailor's assistant named George Vickers opened it and laid it near a fire to dry. The story has been repeated for generations, but no one can now prove every detail of that moment. Picture a small room. A fire burns low. Damp cloth hangs in the warmth. Outside, the village is carrying on as usual. No one in the room knows that this ordinary task may change everything. George Vickers became the first recorded plague victim in Eyam. He died in early September 1665. Other deaths followed. At first, people may have hoped it would end there. One death is terrible, but it can still feel like one cruel piece of bad luck. Then another person became ill. Then another. The sickness did not need an army. It passed from home to home, especially where people lived close together. Modern research, based on the parish records, shows that infection inside households was a major danger. A knock on the door began to mean something different. A room with its curtains shut began to worry the neighbours. A bell in the distance could stop a whole street. By the end of 1665, 42 people in Eyam had died. Then winter came, and the number of deaths fell for a while. For a moment, the village had a little hope. Perhaps the worst was over. But it was not. In the spring of 1666, the plague returned. And this time, Eyam had to decide what kind of village it would be. Two men stood at the centre of that decision. One was William Mompesson, the rector of Eyam. He had arrived only 2 years earlier, and many villagers did not trust him. The other was Thomas Stanley, the former minister. Stanley had been removed from his post some years earlier, and many villagers trusted him more than they trusted Mompesson. They did not begin as close friends, but plague had made old arguments feel small. They could see what might happen if people fled from Eyam to nearby towns and villages. A person could leave feeling well, carry the illness with them, and bring fear and death to another place. On 24 June 1666, Mompesson asked the village to isolate itself. Thomas Stanley supported the plan. The people of Eyam agreed, although it was a hard and frightening choice. Think about what that meant. There was no medicine that could cure the plague. News moved slowly. Help could not come quickly over the hills. No one knew whose house would be next. Yet the village chose to close itself off.
Choosing to stay did not make the danger smaller. It meant that every family had to live with it inside the boundary. They still needed bread, They still needed water, work, news, and hope. The outside world was close enough to see across the hills, but too risky to touch. Each day, the people of Eyam had to make the same hard promise again, not to carry their suffering beyond the village. A road that had once meant trade, visits, work, and news now became a road no one should take. The hills around Eyam became walls. Food and supplies were brought to places beyond the village boundary. The Earl of Devonshire offered help with provisions. Services were held outdoors at Cocklet Delph, where people could stand apart from one another.
One of the most remembered parts of Eyam's story is the boundary stone. People from outside the village are said to have left food there. Eyam villagers left coins in holes filled with vinegar, hoping the liquid would make the money safe to touch. The stone can still be seen today. Imagine the quiet of that exchange. A basket left in the grass, a few coins in a small hollow of stone. A person standing far away, waiting until the other person is gone. No handshake, no shared meal, no comfort. Only distance, only trust. And every day, the question remained. Had the village made the right choice? The summer of 1666 was the worst time. The plague spread quickly again. August was especially terrible. Some days saw 5 or 6 deaths. Modern research suggests that the disease did not move through Eyam in just one way. It likely spread through contact with infected animals and parasites, and also from person to person. What mattered most to the villagers was simpler. It was in their homes, and they were afraid. The village grew quieter. Doors stayed closed. A chair at a table could be empty by evening. A child could wake in one world and fall asleep in another. The people of Eyam were not heroes every hour of every day. They were frightened people. They grieved. They waited. They prayed. They did what they could. That is what makes their choice so hard to forget. The parish records preserve names and burial dates from these months. They show how quickly a household could change. Modern research, using those records alongside information about the village homes, found that living with an infected person greatly increased the risk of infection. The plague was not something people could watch coming down the road. It was in shared rooms, shared meals, and the close spaces of home. The place where a family looked for shelter could also be the place where the sickness found the next person. One of the most painful stories belongs to Elizabeth Hancock. Elizabeth lived at Riley Farm, just outside the village. In August 1666, her husband and all 6 of her children died within 8 days. They were buried in a field near the farm. The graves are still remembered as the Riley graves. It is easy to say those words quickly. A husband, 6 children, 8 days. But a life is not a number. Each child had a face, a voice, a place at home. Each morning, Elizabeth would have woken into a silence that was larger than the day before. We do not know every thought she had. We should not pretend that we do. But we can understand this much. She had to keep going when almost everything she loved was gone. Local history says that people from a nearby village watched from a distance, too afraid to come down and help her. Whether every detail is exact or not, the story carries a hard truth about plague. Fear separated people when they needed one another most. The plague also came close to William Mompesson's own home. His young wife, Catherine, had helped care for sick people in Eyam. She became ill herself. She died on 23rd August 1666. She was 27 years old. For William, the choice to stay was no longer only a duty to his village.
It had entered his own house. It sat beside his own fire. It took the person he loved. Mompesson wrote letters during the plague. They show a man who was afraid, tired, and full of grief, yet still trying to lead the people around him. That matters. He was not a man standing safely above the village, asking others to suffer. He stayed with them. And Thomas Stanley, who had once been pushed aside, stood with him too. All across Eyam, people kept living in the shadow of the next knock at the door. They brought food to those who could not leave home. They buried family members where they could. They stood far apart at outdoor worship. They looked at the road out of the village and did not take it. It was not a perfect wall. History suggests that the boundary was not obeyed in every single case, but the great act of isolation held long enough to make a difference. And still the deaths came, not as one great wave that ended in a day, but one name after another, one family after another, until even those who survived must have wondered whether there would be anything left to save. By the autumn of 1666, the plague began to fade. The last recorded plague death in Eyam was Abraham Morton on 1st of November 1666. The village had lived through more than a year of fear. The cost was terrible. The familiar number is about 260 deaths. A later study of the parish records counted 257 plague deaths and estimated that roughly 700 people had been at risk when the outbreak began. The exact population and totals have been debated, but the loss was enormous either way. When the danger finally passed, the roads did not suddenly become happy again. A village does not forget its dead because a disease has gone. There were empty homes, empty beds, empty places in the church and at the table. There were fields that had to be worked by hands that were left. There were children who had to grow up knowing names they would never hear spoken again. Eyam survived. The people who remained rebuilt their lives. The village's plague story was kept alive in parish records, letters, graves, stones, and the memories passed down through generations. Today, visitors can still see plague cottages, the Riley graves, Cutlet Delph, and the Boundary Stone. They are not just old places, they are reminders. The story of Eyam is not simple. It is not a story of people who felt no fear. It is not proof that good choices save everyone. It is a story of ordinary people who saw danger coming and understood that their choices could reach beyond their own homes. They did not know who exactly they might protect. They did not know whether anyone would remember their names. But they stayed. And because they stayed, nearby communities were less exposed to the plague. No one can measure exactly how many lives that choice may have protected, but the isolation almost certainly reduced the chance of the disease spreading outward. So when you think of Eyam, do not only think of a plague village. Think of a small community facing a terrible choice. Think of a woman walking to a field with grief too large for words. Think of two ministers putting aside old divisions. Think of food left on grass and coins left in vinegar. Think of a road that people refused to take. And then ask yourself one quiet question. If the danger was at your door and leaving might carry it to someone else, would you have stayed? If this story has stayed with you, leave your answer below. And if you want more true stories from the past, told slowly and with care, you are welcome to join Eternity's Whisper. The stones of Eyam are still there. They do not speak, but they remind us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the choice to stay.